Consider the granulated white powder sitting in your kitchen cabinet. It appears chemically pure, innocent, a simple carbohydrate to sweeten your morning coffee. Yet, if you were to dissolve that crystal in the solvent of history, the liquid would turn a deep crimson red. This commodity, now cheaper than dirt, was once the primary architect of the transatlantic slave trade and the driving force behind the genocide of the indigenous Caribbean. We think of it as a treat, but for centuries it was the white gold that fueled an empire of whips and chains.
But before it became the silent killer in our modern diet, destroying our metabolic health from the inside out, it was a rare luxury that toppled monarchies. To truly grasp the magnitude of the sugar trade, we must strip away the colorful packaging of the confectionery aisle and examine the brutal machinery that made it possible. How did a simple grass from the Pacific evolve into the most destructive agricultural force in human history?
The narrative does not begin in the salons of Europe, but deep within the prehistoric rainforests of New Guinea, some 8,000 years ago. Indigenous Papuans were the first to domesticate Saccharum officinarum, a giant reed that thrived in the heavy tropical rains. For them, there was no complex refining process, no white granules. They simply broke the stalks and chewed the raw fiber, extracting a rush of sweet juice that served as a vital energy source for survival in the dense jungle terrain.
Slowly, this botanical curiosity drifted westward, carried by Austronesian seafarers to the fertile delta of the Ganges. It was here, in the shadow of the Himalayas, that the first great revolution occurred. Technicians of the Gupta Empire unlocked the secret of crystallization, boiling the cane juice until it transformed into khanda, a rock-hard substance that could withstand long journeys. Suddenly, sweetness was no longer a fleeting sensation, but a durable asset that could be stored, traded, and taxed.
When the armies of the Rashidun Caliphate swept into Sassanid Persia, they discovered vast stockpiles of this precious silver gravel. Recognizing its immense value, they integrated the crop into the Arab agricultural revolution, constructing elaborate irrigation systems to coax the thirsty cane out of the arid soil of the Levant and North Africa. They perfected the art of clarification, using milk and lime to purge impurities, producing a sugar of blinding whiteness that became the envy of the known world.
Europe remained in the dark, relying on the labor-intensive production of honey, until the violent collision of the Crusades. Frankish knights, starving and besieged near the city of Tyre, discovered fields of this alien reed and found that the juice could stave off death. William of Tyre recorded their fascination, calling it a honey without bees that was most necessary for the use of mortals. They brought this addiction back to the cold castles of the West, igniting a demand that no amount of Mediterranean production could ever satisfy.
The true metamorphosis of sugar from a medicinal spice to a global commodity began not in the Caribbean, but on the steep volcanic slopes of Madeira. Here, the Portuguese crown established a prototype for the plantation system that would eventually devour the New World. They carved extensive aqueducts, known as levadas, into the rock face to irrigate the thirsty cane, funding the endeavor with Genoese capital and fueling it with the labor of enslaved Guanches from the Canary Islands. This Atlantic laboratory proved that sugar could be produced at an industrial scale, provided one was willing to treat human life as a consumable resource within the production cycle.
On his second voyage across the Atlantic in 1493, Christopher Columbus carried the genetic ancestor of this destruction in the hold of his ship. He planted the first cane shoots in the virgin soil of Hispaniola, where the crop reacted to the tropical humidity with terrifying vigor. The stalks grew thicker and faster than they ever had in the Old World, ripening in a perpetual summer that allowed for year-round harvesting. This botanical success sealed the fate of the hemisphere, transforming the islands from potential settlements into vast monocultural factories designed for a single purpose, the extraction of sucrose.
The operation of a Caribbean ñeño, or sugar mill, was a vision of industrial hell dropped into a tropical paradise. It required a synchronization of agriculture and manufacturing that was centuries ahead of its time, demanding round-the-clock labor during the harvest season, known as the safra. Enslaved workers fed the crushing rollers with exhausted limbs, risking amputation at every moment, while others stood over boiling copper cauldrons in temperatures that frequently caused fatal heat stroke. The air was thick with the cloying scent of molasses and the smoke of the furnaces, a sensory overload that signaled the creation of wealth for the absentee landlords of Bristol and Bordeaux.
This explosion in supply coincided with a radical shift in the European palate, driven by the introduction of 3 bitter alkaloids: tea from China, coffee from Arabia, and chocolate from the Americas. These stimulants were naturally unpalatable to the Western tongue, but when married with the crystals of the Caribbean, they became irresistible vehicles for calorie consumption. Sugar ceased to be a decorative spice used to preserve meat and became the fuel for the emerging industrial workforce, providing a cheap, instant energy rush that replaced the lethargy of alcohol-based hydration.
Before we examine the political consequences of this addiction, I have a question for you. In the modern era, we often discuss the ethics of our smartphones and fast fashion, but rarely do we act on it. If you lived in 18th century London, knowing that every lump of sugar in your tea was directly linked to the whip, would you have joined the boycott? Pause the video and let me know in the comments below if you think you would have had the moral fortitude to drink your tea unsweetened.
The demand for this white gold created a geopolitical gravity well that distorted the demographics of 3 continents. The French colony of Saint-Domingue became the most profitable sphere of influence on Earth, exporting more sugar than all the British islands combined. Yet it consumed human lives at a rate that necessitated a complete population replacement every 20 years. The soil of the West Indies was manured with the bodies of the Ashanti, the Yoruba, and the Congo, creating a spectral economy where the sweetness on a Parisian table was mathematically proportional to the blood spilled in the tropics.
By the late 18th century, the West India interest had evolved into one of the most powerful lobbying groups in the British Parliament, purchasing seats and titles with the proceeds of the cane fields. They constructed a protectionist wall around their monopoly, ensuring that the average citizen paid artificially high prices to sustain the plantation system. The great port cities of Liverpool and Nantes expanded into metropolises, their civic architecture and grand institutions built upon the triangular flow of molasses, rum, and captives. Yet this monolithic power structure contained the seeds of its own dissolution. The very visibility of sugar's cruelty sparked the first mass consumer movement in history, as abolitionists like Thomas Clarkson circulated diagrams of slave ships and distributed pamphlets urging families to reject the blood-stained produce. Crockery manufacturers began producing sugar bowls emblazoned with the slogan, "East India sugar not made by slaves," marking the first time that ethical sourcing became a marketing tool. The tide was turning, but it would take a new chemical rival to truly break the cane's dominion.
The monopoly of the tropical cane was finally shattered not by morality, but by the geopolitical friction of the Napoleonic Wars. When the Royal Navy blockaded continental Europe, cutting off the Caribbean supply, the desperate French Empire turned to the experiments of Franz Karl Achard in Prussia, proving that sucrose could be extracted from the humble white beet. This innovation decoupled sweetness from the tropics, bringing production into the temperate heart of the West, and paving the way for the laboratory-born syrups of the 20th century. The exclusive luxury of the planter class was democratized into a cheap industrial filler, transforming the global diet more radically than any famine or feast in recorded history.
Today, we navigate a nutritional sphere where scarcity has been inverted into a terrifying ubiquity. Sugar is no longer merely a condiment, but a structural element of the food supply, concealed within everything from cured meats to savory sauces under a dozen chemical aliases. the violence of the industry has shifted from the physical brutality of the overseer to the chronic internal devastation of metabolic syndrome. We have effectively traded the iron shackle for the insulin pump, remaining just as bound to the cycle of extraction and consumption as the Georgian aristocrats who unknowingly sipped the blood of the Caribbean.
The arc of this crystal serves as a somber mirror for the human condition, reflecting a relentless pursuit of sensory pleasure regardless of the collateral damage. From the sacred rituals of New Guinea to the high-fructose corn silos of Iowa, our obsession has redrawn maps, enslaved millions, and altered the biological destiny of our species. It demonstrates that our primal drive to hoard energy, evolved for a world of starvation, has become a liability in an era of manufactured surplus. We are ancient organisms trapped in a modern cage of our own design, fed by a supply chain that has always prioritized profit over preservation. As you look at the granules in your pantry, try to see beyond the white purity to the complex network of history that delivered them to your table. It is a substance that built the modern world, yet it remains one of our most dangerous indulgences. I leave you with a question to ponder in the comments below. Given the history of exploitation and the modern health crisis, do you believe governments should regulate sugar with the same severity as tobacco, or is the freedom to consume ultimately a personal responsibility? I am Alistair, and I look forward to unraveling the next mystery with you.